Hi, everyone. Welcome as a community. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Alex Vuyk, who's here with us today. She's a counseling psychologist, PhD, and a former ASA teacher. So I think that's a plus. That's really valuable to us because she knows the ASA community. And she's joining us today to talk about an important matter related to social emotional health of our students, especially high schoolers. And this conversation, this webinar, is one of a series of conversations that we want to initiate regarding social emotional development of our students. This one in particular will talk about healthy relationships, consent, and harassment, and how we can accompany the development of the students at ASA. So Dr. Alex Vuyk, please feel free to start.
Thank you, Renata. I am so happy to be back at ASA now as a psychologist. I was a teacher before I left for the US to get my PhD. And it was a great couple of years in which I made students work a lot. So I actually know the community a little bit and would like to talk to you somehow about healthy relationships, okay? Healthy relationships and what they look like, healthy relationships and what they don't look like. What do we need to look for when we're talking about healthy relationships, especially regarding consent and harassment, and especially in the blurry lines. This is part of what I think is most important in society today, for teenagers in general, but actually for everyone. So to get started, I would like you to think a little bit. Take some time, okay? Take some time. How do you guys model healthy relationships at home? Okay, what is the messages that you give without talking about it? What are the things that your kids would see in your relationships if they are just looking at it, if they are thinking about your relationships, not just parents, but your relationships with your other kids, your relationships with your friends, your relationships with the people that you interact with. Because kids look at us. Kids look at us to see how they are supposed to behave in the world. So what would they see from our models? Not from what we say, but from what we do. In that same line, think a little bit as well. How have we taught our kids about consent? Do you remember having a specific conversation with them about consent and what consent means? At what time do you remember having that conversation? And I don't mean necessarily only sexual consent in this area, okay? But consent in general, consent in life. How have we taught them? And what do we model? What do they see when they see us behaving and when they see us doing things? So to see what are some of the influences that they might have. How have we taught our kids about harassment? What have you specifically told them? How have you taught them about it? Have you said anything in particular? Have you not said anything? Have you just mentioned it in passing? What are the actual things that you've done? So take some time to think about it. Think about some experiences they might have had. If you had some interesting conversations in that regard, think about them, remember them, and say, oh, how did they go? And if not, well, it's time. I will guide you a little bit in how to have those conversations because that is important. So let's get started with consent, because consent is at the core of any healthy relationship that we want to talk about. What does consent mean? Well, number one, consenting. It's actually, we use it as a verb, not as a noun, because consent is a process, is an active process. And in this process, we choose which activity or activities in which ones we want to participate with another person. Okay. So what do we want to do? Like, consent starts at 5 years old. Like, we can even teach consent to very young kids by saying, do you want to play soccer? Do you want to play with the dolls? Do you want to play with this? Because consent is an active process of choosing which activities do I want to participate in with another person in a free and willing manner, okay? And with shared responsibility for our actions. So if I said, yes, Peter, let's go and play ball, and I kick the ball and I break someone's window, then we're both on the hook, you know? It's a shared responsibility for our actions. I cannot go and say, but he made me play ball. I didn't want to kick the ball. I consented. I was consenting. I was engaging in that active process of choosing in what to participate freely and willingly. And so it can be very young to consent to do that. And then as we grow older, it can turn into consenting to what activities do we do? What do we do as friends? What do we do in a romantic relationship? And then even getting to the sexual realm. Do I consent to hold hands? Do I consent to be touched? Do I consent to other types of sexual activity? And so consenting, that's why it's so important to understand that it's an ongoing process, okay? It's not an on-off switch that you turn on and then you like, it's on forever, okay? It's on forever. Especially, this is very important to think about, because sometimes the lines get blurry, you know? The kids will say that I didn't know that she didn't want to. I felt that they were okay with it. Even in other things, like we have a group of kids, right? Imagine there's a group of kids and everyone is talking behind another kid's back. So are you actively choosing to participate in that activity with that group of people freely, willingly, and having shared responsibility for your actions? So if you choose to stay in that group and trash talking your classmate, okay, remember to take responsibility for that when the person gets upset, when the person says something that, oh, no, that wasn't working, or remember to give consent, okay? Like, you are there and you are participating. It's an ongoing process. We are able to remove ourselves from the situations, even if we were not okay with them at the beginning. It's not that we need to give one wrong message, like one message, and then okay, it's gonna be fine. Then it means that you have consented forever. So here's the key. If you want to get like one word to define consent, pick one word to define consent. Have you thought of it? The answer is yes. When there is a mutual consent, everyone's answer is an enthusiastic yes. It means like consent is saying yes, thinking yes, participating, being active in it. This is a website that I put down there, scarletteen.com, which gives a lot of information for kids on how to ask these questions, how to talk about consent, how to navigate consent. Because there's situations in which consent gets more complicated. For example, think about, like, there's occasions when someone, I don't know, first time boyfriend coming over to the house, boyfriend is sitting on the couch and they are talking, and then they are holding hands, and perhaps they hold hands at school, but at home, the kid's embarrassed. At home, the kid doesn't want to do that. Does it mean that because they hold hands at school, they're they should be automatically holding hands everywhere. So perhaps, like, what happens if, I don't know, I take my hand away and then my new boyfriend, my first boyfriend, gets upset? This is where the somehow blurry lines come in. I felt obligated to do it. I felt like he got angry. He would get angry with me otherwise. He would say that I like would ask me to, I don't know, what if he felt sad because he thought that I was embarrassed? Like, there's a million ways that people could interpret these actions. And that's why the conversations are very important. Okay. When there's consent, the answer is yes. So we need to be doing this all the time in every area of our relationships. If to have adequate boundaries with our friends, to know how to, like, when are we on the right side of relationships? When are we going into a healthy relationship? Because the basic thing is that in relationships, we don't ever feel that we're threatened, that we're harassed. There is no place for violence, for anything that might cross our boundaries without consequences. This is especially important during adolescence, where peer pressure will take kids to do a lot of things that they might not want, and they will actually like consent, but without wanting to. So here, that's why I have kept this definition here, so that we can go over some of the tough situations that our kids might encounter when in regards to healthy relationships and concern. Okay. So when we're saying freely, if the person is being coerced, if the person is if someone is threatening me, either we go to this person's house, or I will be upset with you, I will remove your name from the group project. Those are things that would go against their consent. Those are not free, those are not willing. If we are not willing to do something, we should be able to say it. We have to be able to speak up, okay? To put our voice out there and to learn all the conversation skills, all the social skills that we need to have those difficult conversations. And so when our kids come and ask and tell us, well, they didn't want me to do it, or I didn't mean to do it, or I didn't know it was so bad, or I didn't actually want to do it, we can actually share with them, here is how you can do this. Talk to them about consent, like teach them about consent and its role in healthy relationships. How do we know when we're walking that line, and how do we make ourselves known? And how do we know we are the ones receiving consent? Well, if the other person hasn't actually said that they are willing and able to do it, then we should assume it's not going to happen. Then we should assume that they're not consenting. When consent is mutual and real, and everyone really wants to, everyone will say, hey, yeah, let's go to the movies. Yes, everyone will light up and try to get everyone on board and go. When someone is not on board with going to the movies, then people try to convince them, as opposed to let them just fall asleep and not doing anything, or trying to drag them against their will. So how do we know the ones that are on when it's on our kids to receive that consent? By teaching them that yes always means yes, and no doesn't mean maybe, and no doesn't mean yes, and maybe means maybe. Because if we go back to this, have we ever said anything regarding, well, if like, if you want to say yes, you have to say no first, a couple of times first, so that people won't think you're easy, or that people won't say that you say yes all the time. Like, what are the messages that we have given regarding no's and yeses? Are our no's worthy, or do we have an easy no? Because that is also something to understand. If we as parents say no a lot of the time, but in reality we mean yes, and our no means eventually yes, then our kids are not getting the message of what a real yes looks like and what a real no looks like. So we also have to be consistent with that and honor that, the yeses and the nos that we give to our kids. Because otherwise, going a bit to the dark side here, we find harassment, which does not have a place in any healthy relationship. Anything leading to harassment, it starts with not giving consent, but it actually ends up to, it is a form of violence. Sometimes we're reluctant to think about daily situations as harassment, okay? But it takes, like, whenever we have an abuse of power that leads to the person that's experiencing it to a feeling of indefension, like they are helpless, that they cannot defend themselves. And it leads them to a state of risk, that they are at risk of losing something, at risk of getting in trouble. So I asked you a question about the blurry lines there. Why? Because we always think that harassment is something that happens to other people. A recent study was done about on bullying in students. And it's not we, because I was not part of the team, but what was found was that all students were familiar with all the bullying definitions. All students knew what that meant. All students were able to find it in vignettes. They had the theory down to a T. But when thinking about their experiences, but it doesn't happen here. But what I did wasn't bullying. Or, what I did wasn't harassment. We find it easier to identify it in theory than to understand that this is happening to us. And it's even worse when our kids are the ones being the perpetrators. Because somehow here's the tough part as a parent. We might think that we're doing something wrong. We might think that we're failing. We might not want to face the situation that actually this is a good kid in a lot of other areas, and this good kid is harassing someone. And so this is called cognitive dissonance. Sometimes we just don't want to see it. And so we use our defense mechanisms to protect us from that. And so we're somehow oblivious to that reality without wanting it, okay? Not because we choose to be responsible parents, of course, but because we just don't connect the dots between the official definition of bullying, harassment, and even abuse, and our kids. So the first thing is to think, yes, all of our kids could be perpetrators. All of our kids could be doing this. And we have to be open to it. We cannot pretend it doesn't happen. We cannot pretend we're not, our kids will not be involved. We cannot pretend our kids will not be bystanders. We need to understand that this might happen and that we can guide them in the blurry lines to say, hey, I think you're going overboard. I think this is getting too serious. Or, hey, you think this is nothing, but it can escalate, and it's going to escalate easy. Because here's the thing with harassment. It can be verbal. It can be about any topic, but it's usually this abuse of power that the person experiences it as losing ultimately their dignity. These days it happens online. these days it happens in person, it happens in the bathroom, it happens in all the old-fashioned ways that we always had, but it added a new dimension, which is social media and phones. And I'm not a Luddite who's going to tell you, oh, you don't have to give your kids phones, because those are part of reality now, especially in the days of COVID and online learning. It's our windows to the world. Well, we need to be aware of what they're doing, and we need to be open to the possibility that this might be happening. Because you're familiar with Finsta or Fifinsta. Those are the fake Instagram accounts or hidden Instagram accounts that kids use so that their families won't follow them. So they have usually one official Instagram account where they post all the kosher pictures for everyone to see, that their grandma and their aunts can see. And then they have a hidden account in which they post the things that they want their friends to see. And then sometimes they have a third account, the Fifinsta, fake Insta, where they put the things that they only want a few select inner circle to see. And so you can imagine how what goes on in those areas can look a little like the dark web and the deep web and the Silk Road, and how it can turn into harassment quicker than the official Alex Vuyk Instagram account where I post all my shiny, happy pictures. So the reason I didn't want to go along in depth into the definitions of harassment and types of harassment, it's because you know them. What we need is help to find those blurry lines, help to find, like, how do we manage this? What do we do in these cases? How do we help them have healthy relationships? How do we guide our kids? Like, how do we show them what to do? Okay. So here's the key. Here's the key. It's having the difficult conversations with your kids. Okay. Do you know how to have the difficult conversations? Or do you brace yourself and hope that the day doesn't come and then push it and postpone it and have someone else and ask someone, can you talk to so-and-so, like you ask the godmother or you ask the aunt or the grandma or a friend, or if you're a mom, you ask the dad, or if you're the dad, you ask the mom. Avoiding the difficult conversations. If you do that, you're not alone. That is a very common response. People try to do that a lot of the time, or they get by with having, I don't know, 3 out of the 10 they should be having, or they would want to be having. Because here's the thing. Doing this is one of the most important things you can do as parents of teenagers, okay? As well as one of the hardest things to do with them. Why? Because they don't come easy. They don't come naturally. Sometimes you might feel defensive. Sometimes they might feel defensive. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these conversations are hard. I think it's important to, like, okay, I will have to broach the subject of the fact that I don't like the way their friends are talking when they're at home. I don't like the way they are referring to other girls. I don't like the comments they make about other people's bodies. Because I'm sure you can think about the situation, right? You're at home and you're over here. The kids close to you, they're loud, they're yelling, they don't realize you're listening, but they don't mind either. And so it's like, but so-and-so, they've gotten so fat. Oh, she's a whale. Oh, they're ugly. Oh, like, who would want to be with her? Or, oh, he's awful. But usually it's girls trash talking other girls or guys trash talking girls. So, and you wonder, should I intervene? Should I go and stop it? What should I do? And it will depend, like in those cases, it will depend on the situation. If it is something that you see is illegal, if it is something that you see is deeply troubling and problematic, intervene. Stop it right there. If it is something that you're like, ugh, cringing, but it's not illegal, it's not, then probably it would be a better idea to keep it for the difficult conversation. And not postpone it too long. Not postpone it too long, but just opening up the difficult conversation. It would be sooner than later. Sooner than later, because you would want to know, how's your kid feeling about that? How did your kid feel when all the other kids in the group were saying all those horrible remarks? Were they consenting to that? How were they feeling while it was happening? Were they really having fun, or and if they were having fun, why do you think it was fun to tear someone apart? Like what made it fun? Okay. So these are all things that we want to talk about. We want to hear them out. Here's how to, okay? Because here's my call to action to you. Here's what we need to do, okay? And I'll give you concrete tips on how to do it, because what I want this is to be practical, because lectures on what harassment is, you can find enough of them on YouTube. So here's a checklist. First, you need to know what they're up to. You need to know what they're doing. You need to know what they're thinking. You need to know what activities they're engaging in, with consent or with doubtful consent. Like, where is it blurry for them? Where is it not blurry for them? What are they up to? Are they drinking every weekend? Do you know? Where are they drinking? Does the family know? Like, and if they assure you they don't drink and you know it's a lie, how could you facilitate the conversation so that they will open up? So it's a little bit of knowing what they're up to. It doesn't hurt to be friends or in good terms with the other parents and to know what they're like, how are they talking about their kids' activities and what they're doing. And then notice when their moods and their behaviors change. I know that adolescence is a time for a lot of mood changes and a lot of shifts. And it's very common to be super happy at one moment. Oh my God, I'm talking to so-and-so. And then at the other time, I hate him, he's awful. But anything that seems a bit off, out of the ordinary, something that seems too strong, or a kid that used to be withdrawn and then suddenly is super outgoing and super, and like just wants to be like, anything that's a change in what there used to be. And it doesn't need to always have a negative explanation, you know, but it will get you in the habit of noticing it and acknowledging it. And that is the first step. Okay. That is the first step. So that you can see what they're doing that they weren't doing before. You can see if they seem moodier, if they seem angrier, if they seem like nothing's good enough, or if they seem anxious, or if they suddenly seem very eager to please others, or start to be more obsessed with their bodies and their body image and what other people are going to think if they wear this in a way that they weren't before. Okay, notice those changes and talk with them. So you need to show openness, okay? Like, even if it is for a behavior that you don't approve. Let's go over something that is basic here. If you want them to open up, they need to know that you're understanding and not your judgment. And this does not mean that you cannot set firm boundaries. Okay, this just means that you're trying to understand what happened. Afterwards, you can set all the boundaries you want. You can choose to enforce consequences if they did break one of the rules that you had, if they're doing things that you don't approve. However, setting consequences and like dealing with the actions, that is the last step. That is the last thing that we do. Think about it as a trial. The sentence and executing the sentence is the last part. First, we need to gather information. And that information is never going to come if the first thing I say is, hey, Annie, I hear you're being mean to your classmates. I hear that so-and-so said that you were like talking behind their backs and that you were saying that she was awful and that she should have given you this and that. Like, is it true? Well, do you think you're going to get a good conversation out of that? I don't think so. It's probably either Annie blushing and being very embarrassed and not knowing what to do or what to say, or it's going to be Annie denying, I didn't do anything. I didn't do that. I didn't. So show openness. Like, what happened? Like, how are things going with so-and-so? Like, did anything happen at school? Because judging, that face like, I can't believe I raised you to do this. I can't believe a daughter of mine would do this. Does not put us in a mood for constructive change. It actually puts us in a mood to back away and try to separate ourselves from that, which is what typically, like the same thing that happens with the example I gave of everyone knows what bullying is, but it's hard to imagine myself doing it, being a perpetrator, or it's hard to imagine myself being a bystander. It's easier to see it from the point of view of the victim, but not if I'm the victim and I don't want to think that I'm in that position. So show openness so that you can get to the point of what's happening, because you can accept without approving what's happening. You can disagree with what's happening, but to be able to deal with it effectively, you need to accept it, which is just come to terms with the fact that it's happening. If you don't like your kids consenting to drinking, first you have to admit that they're drinking. And for that, you need to explore the possibilities of that happening. Or if you're okay with them consenting to drinking, but not consenting to them blacking out at parties, you also need to know what's happening. Like, are they blacking out at parties or not? So if you want that step to happen, then you need to show your openness, okay? And it doesn't mean I'll be your best friend and I'll buy you the alcohol, or it's okay, whatever you do, I won't get angry with you. And it doesn't mean it's free of consequences. It just means that you're willing to listen. So dare to have these difficult conversations with them. And for those difficult conversations, how they're going to happen in a proper way is like using active listening skills, okay? Like, listen. For active listening, one of the keys is to ask open-ended questions as opposed to closed-ended questions. Questions that can be answered with yes or no close the conversation. So instead of saying, did you do this? Ask, how did this thing happen? How did it go with this? And then like reflect on what they're saying and show that you're listening. Let them do the talking and you gently guide along, prodding them for that, so that we can help them get to that. Here's a way in which this is a strategy taken from DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, and it's a strategy for interpersonal effectiveness. It's a skill for interpersonal effectiveness. The idea is that these skills can be learned. If we don't know how to have these difficult conversations, we can learn. And a way to remember it is the GIVE acronym. Okay, what does GIVE stand for? The G is for gentle. Okay, when we're having the conversation, we can be gentle. Okay, remember to be gentle to the person, and gentle does not mean that you have to be all of the time super that you don't have to show emotion. Okay, it doesn't mean that. It just means like, don't attack them personally. Don't say, oh my God, you're an idiot. I can't believe you did that. Okay. Don't threaten them with things. Don't go around judging. Okay. And judging is something that comes so automatically to all of us. And it's something that has the power to shut the other person off. So imagine that you're an alien on Earth and that you're trying to understand these experiences of weird relationships among teenagers. Okay. Imagine that you have never heard of a teenager having friends or a teenager having a romantic relationship. So be curious. Okay. That's the I. I is for interest. Show interest. Show interest in them. Show interest in what they're saying. Like, show good listening skills. Don't interrupt. And by good listening skills means honestly listen with both ears and all of your brain. Don't start thinking about the perfect reply or the perfect comeback or what you're going to tell them when they stop to catch a breath. Okay, because a lot of the times we do that. We are not fully listening if we're trying to think of what the other person's going to tell us. So I have to come up with an answer so I win. Or I have to know what to answer. And by looking for the answer in the meantime, we are not showing interest. We get sidetracked. So just show interest. Don't interrupt them. Listen to them. And like, be curious, as if you are an alien that doesn't understand how these things happen and you want to learn and you want to know. As if you are not a teenager in 2021 and you want to know what in the world are teenagers thinking in 2021 without your 1976 judgment of what teenagers in 2021 should be thinking or doing. From then on, the V is for validate. Validate is one of the most misunderstood words these days. Because validate does not mean approval, okay? But validate means acknowledge other people's thoughts and feelings, even if they're not the same as yours, even if you think differently, even if you feel differently, even if you're doing something different, okay? But just acknowledge their thoughts and feelings and understanding that they feel that way. That is validating. Accepting their feelings as valid. Accepting the way they are thinking as valid. You may not validate their actions, okay? Because, for example, I might be upset with my classmate because they laughed at me in the middle of philosophy class and I was very embarrassed and I thought it was awful. And so you can validate that and you can empathize with that feeling because it doesn't feel good to being laughed at in the middle of philosophy class. Yet you don't validate actions that are not okay with your values, okay? You can validate the feeling. I understand why you feel that way. Yeah, it would be logical that you felt that way. Yet that does not mean that I have the right to start an unfounded rumor about that classmate later on. It does not mean that I have the right to do something that would hurt him. Okay, I have to go and I can go and confront. I can be upset and let it go. I can choose to talk to the teacher about it. There's a lot of options that I can have. And you as parents, you validate their thoughts, validate their feelings. That means acknowledge them, because validating, accepting, it doesn't mean approving. It just means that you can see their point of view. You have a different one, your point of view, but you can see theirs. It doesn't mean that they have convinced you, okay? But you can validate that. And that helps a lot to be able to see it from their perspective. And from then on, gently guiding them to what you think would be an appropriate answer, an appropriate response, an appropriate thing to say in those kinds of situations. Okay. And that will make them more likely to want to continue talking, because they are less likely to feel judged. And then the E is for easy. Okay. Try to have an easy attitude, like smile often, be lighthearted, like be just don't over dramatize it, or like try to stay neutral instead of being super upset and offended by the things that have happened. And oh my God, I can't believe you, I raised you for this. But more like, okay, I understand. So, okay. Oh, okay. So what happened afterwards? Okay. I need to know, like, I need to know what happened. This is very serious. I need to, like, in the context of something very serious, that is being easy. Okay. And just like, if they're having a difficult time, you can smile gently and say, okay, it's okay. You can take your time. I'll be here. I just need to understand. I'm here to see what, like, to try to help you with this, or like, I just want to understand. Let me see how this can go. And so using this acronym, using these strategies will enhance the chance that they will want to tell us if something bad is going on, or that we will figure out if they are like on the receiving side of harassment, if they are on the perpetrating side of harassment, if there's something that they feel pressured to do and they don't want to give their consent, and they don't want to do the things they need. Okay. So this will make them more likely to want to talk to you and to do have these difficult conversations. Okay. So in the light of that, I want you to think about this. Okay. What's your take home message today? We talked about healthy relationships. We talked about like how they include an element of consent in every part, because consent is an active process. Okay. Consent is, I consent to this conversation. I consent to this activity. I consent to sharing these pieces of information. I consent to joining you in this task. I consent, like, we are always involved in consenting. We are always involved in, like, and we have no, we can learn how to say no when we're actually not consenting. Okay. Because it's very confusing for us when we say yes and supposedly consent, and we actually want to say no. And we thought about, like, we talked about harassment and how do we, like, think of that abuse of power, and how can we reconcile the idea that our kids might be doing it, and without our kids being bad kids, or without necessarily that tainting their character, but because they're adolescents. And so when someone is an adolescent, they are trying out different identities. Okay. They are trying out to see what works, and they're trying out to see what they feel comfortable with, and what they don't feel comfortable with, and how do they express that. And so that is the role of our difficult conversations. Sometimes it's us being a springboard for our kids to feeling like being able to explore their reactions or their feelings regarding something that happened, for example. And they might realize on their own that they did harass someone, and that actually, now that they can think about it, they can actually recognize that it's harassment, and they are not okay thinking of themselves as harassers. They're not okay thinking of themselves as perpetrators. And so therefore they will stop doing it. Like, these are the things that happen during the teenage years. And so that's why these conversations are so tough. We talked about the difficult conversations that you need to be having with them. They have had training on healthy relationships, consent, and harassment. And so this is a good time to start the conversations. Ask them, what do you think is consent? Like, just take it into that, so that you can facilitate that active listening. So of all of that, think about, what is your take-home message today? What did you get out of this webinar? And then choose one thing to put into action to start today. Okay? And what's it? Why today? Not today, not tomorrow, not next Monday, not next year, not your New Year's resolution. Today. Okay? Because as I'm a scientist, I love to cite studies. A study has been done on the immense amount of webinars that we had during the pandemic. And we saw that we overloaded with information of webinars, and that it doesn't actually change our behavior. We don't do anything differently because of the things we know now. We just love the idea of the illusion of change and the illusion that I'll be different and that I'll be better and that I will do some of these wonderful, great things that people talk to me about in this webinar. So let's fight that a little bit, okay? Let's fight that a little bit, and let's get into action, okay? One thing to put into action that you want to start today, okay? Could it be you want to start by opening up a difficult conversation and just seeing how you feel with that? Do you want to start with you looking at the relationships you're modeling and how you actually, by looking at yourself, saying, hey, I actually don't want my kid to see that anymore, so let me change. Are you perhaps going to casually ask them, do you have Finsta? And see, like, because the more scared they'll be, the more ugly things they're doing in there. Are you going to ask them, you can ask them, have you heard of any, like, have your friends been like having difficult interactions online? Like, what's the weirdest thing you found online? The word weird is safer than inappropriate. So if you're open to hearing weird things, then they might be more open to share the inappropriate. Are you going to try listening without immediately starting to think of your answer and immediately starting to think of what you are going to reply to that? I don't know. You tell me. Choose one thing and do it today. And hopefully with that, you'll set in motion the change of actions that lead to permanent behavior change. And you'll have incorporated something that you can say, hey, this is something that actually helps. So if you ask me what's a good time to have the difficult conversations, how to start them, it's in places and times and situations where the interaction is limited. So everyone knows they have a way out. For example, you're driving them to their ballet. You're in the car and you're going to get some shoes. The car is a great place for this. You have a little time before going to dinner and you're gonna go. So that if it gets uncomfortable, that everyone is free to leave, and you need that for practice at the beginning. So yeah, what is the one thing that you're gonna do? I hope this was helpful. I hope I gave you some answers and a lot of questions, because that means I've fulfilled my mission, and this is how you can contact me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vuyk. Now is the time for open question and answers. So if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function in the toolbar to ask a question. You can do so anonymously. I think you just have a box that you want to click there if you want it to be an anonymous question, and then we can go from there. I also want to say that we've been, as Dr. Vuyk expressed earlier, we are doing these same workshops with all of our students. So they're getting the same message as well. I kind of think teachers need to get this message as well, because, you know, as a previous teacher yourself, you probably know that we don't always come equipped with these strategies as well. And so I'm going to jump in with a question. I have one of my own. You were asking about what's the one takeaway, the one strategy that we want to do on. And I know that mine is that I want to focus more on open-ended questions. Being a math teacher by trade, sometimes we really pride ourselves on questioning strategies, but I think we can always get better and focusing not necessarily on zeroing in on the answer, but just trying to see the behavior of thinking or the pattern of thinking through open-ended questions is important. But my question for you is, what is one piece of advice for teachers that you think would be, and we know that there's no magic bullet, we're always learning and growing, but what is maybe a piece of advice that you would give for teachers, being both a teacher previously and in your current position?
For teachers, it would be number one, a zero tolerance policy on harassment. You see it, you intervene, because that is not only helpful, like when you see something that is very clear, because that's, on the one hand, it's helpful for the one that's going through it, and it's helpful for the kids that are thinking of doing it. And that might be swayed either way, which is most of them. Like most of them could go one way or the other, depending on where the majority of the group goes. And so if they see that one behavior is tolerated, encouraged, or not looked at, then they will get the message that it's not that bad. And so if you see something that is clearly harassment, intervene, and intervene promptly and cut it at, nip it at the bud, right there. And for the situations that are tougher, they are gray, and that they don't know how to react, it's the same thing about being open. Be open and validate their, try to understand where the motivations come from, try to understand what it means to them. Why was it funny to laugh about that? Why would you think that? What made it funny? Laughing about their dress. Well, that's a typical one. What made it funny laughing about their dress and saying that it looked like whatever? So try to get it, is there other ways that things can be funny? Okay, it just strikes me as odd that instead of not immediately trying to convince them of the gray area, but allowing them to explore in a way that they might not have thought before. Guide the conversations. And that is what we teachers, we do best.
Again, if you have a question, you can use the Q&A function. We're only going to be here for about 5 more minutes, so now's the time to enter it. Mrs. Renata Zanotti, do you have maybe a farewell message that you would like to give as well?
Just a very big thank you to Dr. Vuyk. It's always a pleasure to hear you. I think you have such a good way of reaching not only adults, but teenagers, and making science accessible. And I really like that. So thank you very much. I hope we can have you as a guest for many more topics and moments where we can talk to different parts of the ASA community. So
I would love to. I would love to. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here and sharing this with you, and just having this difficult conversation that we also need to be having, because sometimes we need to acknowledge, okay, this is happening and we need to do something about it.
You definitely make it easier to have the tough conversations. So thank you.
I'm glad to do that.
For our Spanish speakers, we will be continuing this same webinar tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. So you can log in then same time. It's actually the same link, and it's posted on the consolidated calendar as well. It looks like there's no more questions, so we're going to close out. Thank you again, Dr. Vuyk. Have a fantastic evening. Take care, Renata. And we'll see everybody tomorrow at 7 again. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.